I didn't go looking for a fight. I put up a fence. That's all. A straight line of posts and wire on land my family's held long enough that the dirt feels like it recognizes our boots. But the minute a shiny new subdivision popped up behind my north pasture and their HOA started acting like they owned the horizon, I found out something real fast. Some people can't stand a boundary they didn't get to draw. They sent security in matching polos to mess with my property. They tried to scare me into selling a strip of land I never offered. And when they dragged me into court thinking I'd fold, let's just say they walked out with lighter wallets, heavier regrets, and a whole town laughing behind their backs. And yeah, I did end up installing an electric fence. Legal, posted, and loud enough to teach a grown man the meaning of no trespassing, without me raising my voice once. My name's Luke Mercer, and I live outside a little place called Dry Creek, Oklahoma. Not the kind of town that makes the news unless somebody hits a deer, wins a state title, or gets arrested for doing something dumb on a four-wheeler. My family's been on this land since 1940, back when my granddad bought it cheap because the soil was stubborn and the wind never knew when to quit. He built the first fence line with old oil-field pipe and a mule that hated him. My dad kept it running through drought years and hailstorms, and one tornado that tore the roof off the calving barn, but somehow left the weather vane still pointing like it had a job to do. Now it's mine. 110 acres of pasture, cedar breaks, and fence lines that take a whole morning just to check if you're doing it right. Most days start the same. I step onto my porch before the sun's fully awake, coffee hot, air cold enough to sting a little, and my dog Boone trotting beside me like he's the foreman. I check the troughs, count heads, walk the perimeter, and listen. Ranch life teaches you to listen. If the wind changes, if the birds go quiet, if the cattle get restless, something's coming. And I felt it before I saw it. That shift, like pressure in your ears before a storm. The storm's name was Bright Pines Estates. It showed up one summer like a rash on the edge of town. Perfect streets, perfect lawns, and houses stacked in tidy rows that looked like they'd been stamped out of a catalog. They carved a road right up near my north boundary, planted little ornamental trees that had no business surviving in Oklahoma August, and filled those homes with folks who wanted country living without any of the country. At first, I didn't care. They could argue about mailbox colors and lawn ornaments all day long. My deed was older than their whole development. But then I noticed something. People started walking their dogs right up to my fence line, like it was a scenic overlook. Kids started cutting across the corner of my pasture to fetch balls they shouldn't have kicked over there in the first place. One evening I caught a drone hovering above my calving lot, slow and nosy, like my cattle were a tourist attraction. I ran it off with a rock and a bad attitude, and I thought that'd be the end. It wasn't. So I decided to upgrade that north fence. Not to start trouble, not to show off, just to make the line clear. I sunk new posts deep, ran tight wire, installed a few solar cameras, and hung signs every 10 feet that said private property, no trespassing, video surveillance. Simple, honest. You'd have to work pretty hard to misunderstand it. A week later, I got my first letter. It wasn't addressed to Luke Mercer. It was addressed to property owner, Northern Adjacency Zone, like I was a parking lot they needed to stripe. Heavy cream paper, embossed seal, and a signature at the bottom. Marjorie Klein, President, Bright Pines Homeowners Association. I read the first line and actually laughed. Not because it was funny, but because it was so bold it felt like a prank. The letter said my fence was non-compliant with neighborhood aesthetic standards, and that I was required to remove visual obstructions within 30 days to preserve community harmony. Community harmony. On my ranch. I folded it, set it on the counter, and went back to work like it was junk mail. Then the second letter came. This one wasn't polite. This one had teeth. It claimed my fence was a public safety hazard. It threatened fines, legal action, and corrective enforcement. And tucked in the packet was a satellite image with a red line drawn like a child coloring outside the lines. Except the red line didn't match my deed. It pushed their boundary straight into my land, like they'd decided a few extra feet would look better on their map. That's when my laughter ran out. I wrote them back on a torn sheet of notebook paper because I didn't feel like giving them the satisfaction of letterhead. I told them, in plain English, my property was not part of their HOA. Never had been. Never would be. I attached copies of my deed and the county parcel map. Then I signed it. Luke Mercer, private landowner. And I mailed it. For about a week, Everything went quiet. The kind of quiet that tries to convince you the problem solved itself. And then, on a Thursday afternoon, my phone buzzed with a motion alert. I was knee-deep in mud fixing a leaking valve when Boone lifted his head and growled like he'd heard something he didn't like. I pulled up the camera feed, and there they were. Two men in matching navy polos, khaki pants, sunglasses. One held a clipboard like it was a badge. The other stood with his hands on his hips like he was inspecting a crime scene. They weren't looking at the fence. They were studying it, taking pictures, whispering. The taller one pointed at my camera, then at my sign, and shrugged like rules were optional. Then the heavier one did something that made my stomach drop. He put a boot on my bottom rail and started climbing. I didn't run out there. I didn't yell. I didn't wave a gun around like a movie idiot. I watched. Because my dad taught me something that stuck. Never confront a fool before you collect proof. I saved the footage, tagged it, backed it up. 10 minutes later, they climbed back down, scribbled on their clipboards, and walked off toward the subdivision like they'd just finished a job. A couple days later, I found the first cut. Top wire, snipped clean with bolt cutters. Not weather, not livestock, human hands. I pulled up the feed, and there he was. One of those same men, crouched under my sign like he was trimming a hedge, cutting my wire like he owned it. That's when I called the sheriff. Deputy Mark Riddle came out, stood by my fence, watched the footage on my phone, and whistled low. "Luke," he said, "that's criminal trespass and property damage. You want a report?" I said, "I want a paper trail." He nodded like he respected that. "These HOA folks," he muttered, glancing up at the new rooftops. "They forget where the pavement ends." I thought that might scare them off. Instead, it escalated. A week later, just after midnight, another alert buzzed. Infrared mode. A figure creeping along my fence line with a hoodie and a backpack. Bolt cutters in hand. Same walk. Same build. Same confidence. He cut the wire. And then he leaned in, like he planned to step through. What he didn't know was that I'd replaced that section with a dummy wire connected to a die pack. Harmless, just messy. The second he pushed through, pop. Neon green powder exploded across his hoodie, face, and backpack like a paint factory sneezed. He stumbled back, cussed loud enough for the mic to catch it, and sprinted off into the dark like he'd just remembered he had a conscience. The next morning, Sheriff Harlan Voss himself rolled up. Big man, calm eyes, boots that looked older than my truck. "We got a call," he said, "about a guy running through Bright Pines looking like a radioactive tennis ball." I just handed him the tablet. He watched it without blinking, then exhaled slow. "Well," he said, "that's trespass. No question. Attempted vandalism, too." He shined his light on my signs. "You thinking electric?" I told him, "Agricultural use is legal. I'll post it. I'll do it right." He nodded once, firm. "Do it right, and you're within your rights." "But Luke, this ain't about your fence." I asked, "What's it about?" He looked north, toward the neat little rooftops. "It's about your land." The next day, I got a visitor. A black SUV rolled up my driveway like it had someplace more important to be. Out stepped a woman in pressed slacks and a blazer that didn't belong on gravel. Perfect hair. Perfect smile. Clipboard? No. A leather folder, like she was delivering a verdict. "Mr. Mercer," she said, holding out a hand I didn't take. "Marjorie Klein, president of Bright Pines." I sipped my coffee. "What can I do for you?" She smiled wider, but it didn't reach her eyes. "We're hoping to resolve this situation." "Which part?" I asked. "The trespassing, the vandalism, or the guy who tried to cut my fence at midnight and left looking like a glow stick?" Her smile twitched. "A misunderstanding." That word told me everything. She didn't come to apologize. She came because her people got caught. She opened her folder like a magician about to pull out a rabbit. "What if," she said, "we take this burden off your hands? There's a narrow strip along the north edge, maybe 30 feet. We could purchase it at a fair price. It would create a buffer and reduce conflict." I stared at her for a beat. "How much?" "75,000, she said fast, like she'd practiced. "Quick closing. Cash. And if I say no?" Her eyes narrowed just enough. "Then the association will have to pursue safety enforcement, legal remedies, maybe an injunction. These things can get complicated." There it was. The threat, dressed up like a suggestion. I leaned forward, calm as a fence post. "You're standing on my property, trying to buy land that isn't for sale, while your people are cutting my wire at night. And you're calling that harmony?" She tried to laugh, but it came out thin. We're offering solutions. No, I said quietly. You're offering pressure. Her posture stiffened. Think carefully, Mr. Mercer. I pointed my mug toward the driveway. You should head back to your neighborhood. She held my gaze for a second like she wanted to win something, then turned and walked back to her SUV, heels sinking into dust like the land itself was rejecting her. When she drove off, I didn't feel fear. I felt clarity. Because now I knew what this was. Not aesthetics. Not safety. Acquisition. So I went to the county. At the clerk's office, a woman named Janine, who'd known my family longer than I'd been alive, pulled up my parcel map and squinted at the screen. Well, I'll be, she said. Bright Pines ends right here. She measured with her little digital tool and looked up at me. They're 41 feet south of your fence. 41, I repeated. She nodded. 41 feet of land they don't own, can't regulate, and sure as hell can't fine. I asked for printouts. She gave me 2. Stamped, certified, and laminated like she was preparing for a war. I mailed one to Bright Pines with a sticky note that said stop trespassing. You have no jurisdiction. That's when I installed the electric line. Not some wild, reckless setup. A state-certified agricultural energizer. Proper grounding rods. Warning signs every 10 feet. Electric fence, do not touch. Reflective. Clear. I even had Deputy Riddle look it over, and he nodded like a man approving a job done right. The next morning, my camera caught 2 familiar polos walking up like they owned the place. One leaned toward the fence. The other put his hand right on the top rail. Zap. Clean crack in the morning air. His hat flew off. His clipboard hit the dirt. He made a sound that did not match his confidence at all. His buddy froze, eyes wide, then stumbled backward like he'd just learned fire is hot. I replayed it twice. Not because I'm cruel, but because proof matters. And proof is exactly what ruined them. Because within 24 hours, I got served. Bright Pines filed a civil complaint claiming my hazardous electrified barrier endangered residents and violated community standards. Community standards. On my ranch. So I hired an attorney. A local guy named Wes Calder, the kind of lawyer who wears boots to court and doesn't use fancy words unless he means them. We built a case the way you build a fence line. Straight, tight, and impossible to ignore. County maps. Deed history. Trespass footage. Wire cutting. The die pack incident. The sheriff reports. And the final nail, a recorded conversation. Because yeah, I recorded Marjorie's little think carefully speech, and Oklahoma is a one-party consent state for recordings, so she basically handed me the rope and asked me to tie the knot. Court day came, and the room was packed. Bright Pines residents filled the front rows, stiff and whispering. Their attorney stood up, smooth hair, city suit, and a voice that sounded like he'd never been yelled at by a bull. He painted me like some reckless hillbilly with a death fence. Wes stood and didn't raise his voice once. Your Honor, he said, before we discuss anything else, we'd like to establish one simple fact. Does the plaintiff have jurisdiction over Mr. Mercer's property? He handed the judge the laminated county map. The judge studied it, then looked over her glasses. The HOA boundary ends 41 feet south, she said. Yes, ma'am, Wes replied. So they have no authority here. The HOA lawyer tried to interrupt, but the judge held up a hand. Do you contest the county record? He swallowed. No, Your Honor. That was the moment you could feel the room shift. Wes played the footage next. There's security climbing my fence, cutting my wire, crouching under my signs like grown men pretending they couldn't read. Then he played the audio of Marjorie offering money for my land while threatening enforcement if I refused. You could hear the little gasps in the HOA rows. The kind of gasp people make when they realize the villain isn't who they were told. The judge leaned forward. Ms. Klein, she said, were you attempting to acquire private property while simultaneously pursuing legal action to pressure the owner? Marjorie's face went tight. That's not. The judge cut her off. Answer the question. And that's when Wes dropped the last piece. A survey sketch he'd gotten through a public records request. It showed a proposed access road, cutting straight through the very strip they wanted me to sell, connecting Bright Pines to a planned commercial expansion on the other side. Dated weeks before their first letter ever arrived at my house. Wes didn't gloat. He just said, this was never about safety. It was about access. The judge stared at the sketch like it offended her personally. Then she delivered it, calm, sharp, and final. My fence was legal under agricultural code. The HOA had trespassed, vandalized property, and abused authority. The case was dismissed, and I was awarded damages, legal fees, repairs, and punitive damages for harassment. Bright Pines didn't just lose. They got exposed. Outside the courthouse, a local reporter asked me if I felt bad about it. I took a breath and told the truth. I didn't zap a neighborhood, I said. I reminded them where their neighborhood ends. That should have been the ending. Clean victory, roll credits. But here's the part that still burns in my chest, even now. After the ruling, people started messaging me. Not just congratulations. Not just jokes about the electric cowboy, but stories. Ranchers and small landowners saying, they tried the same thing here. Folks whose parents lost property because they didn't have cameras, didn't know the law, didn't have the money to fight. And I kept thinking about that. How easy it is for power to wear a friendly face and carry a clipboard. So I started helping. Nothing dramatic. Just sharing templates, telling people to get county maps, to document everything, to stop apologizing for owning what they own. And it got bigger than I expected. And that's where the controversy comes in. Because I'll be honest, part of me wonders if the next fight won't be an HOA at all. It'll be the county, or developers, or some new law that makes it easier to rezone land for community growth. Funny how those words always mean the same thing. Somebody takes, somebody loses. So let me ask you something, and I mean it. Where do you land on this? If you move into a new neighborhood, do you inherit the right to control what existed before you? If an HOA thinks it can extend its rules beyond its borders, is that organization protecting community or practicing legalized bullying? And if you were in my boots, would you have played nice, or would you have drawn a line too? Drop your take in the comments. Tell me if you think I went too far, not far enough, or if you've seen something like this happen where you live. Because the truth is, this isn't really about fences. It's about boundaries, the kind on maps, and the kind in people's heads. If you've ever been underestimated, pushed around, or told to just comply to keep the peace, you already know why I didn't. Like, subscribe, and share this with someone who needs a reminder that no is a complete sentence. And sometimes, the only thing standing between you and a bully is a line you're willing to defend.